were beaten, sexually abused. I mean, beaten by day and sexually abused by night.
He would put me on his knee, and he would slip his tongue into my mouth and get me to bite on his tongue.
Couldn't understand why he was doing this to me, because I thought he liked me.
And I thought if we had 8 or 10 Mount Cashels, what a wonderful place it would have been for the orphans and the type of youth that they looked after.
We went to see Brother English, and the son of a bitch gave us a couple of blows to the head.
And they brought me back to Mount Cashel Orphanage, and they brought me into the front door, and they literally picked me up and handed me to the same man I told them about.
I often wondered, passing by Mount Cashel Orphanage and driving home, what secrets this place held within its 4 walls.
The words he said to me, it would be in your best interest to keep your mouth shut.
He told me to transfer the 2 brothers from communities in Newfoundland to elsewhere within the Canadian province.
They told me there'd be no further investigation. That was it.
An operation like this affects a man's memory.
I am personally quite satisfied that when all the evidence is in, the people will know what happened, who made what decisions.
Toronto, a city to get lost in. A city for people like Terry Lemoyne. Terry Lemoyne is one of the little-known victims of sexual abuse at Mount Cashel Orphanage. The public has never heard of Terry Lemoyne. He has never been interviewed. He never appeared at the Hughes inquiry, but he did testify in court against a Christian brother who took the 7-year-old Lemoyne and another child to bed nightly and sexually molested them.
I'm still working on it today to try to find who I am because of what I went through, and it's been a roller coaster ride. I mean, personally, my relationships with women is almost impossible. If they last 2 hours, I'm lucky. I'm doing really good, I've been in various treatment centers. I've gone through things that I don't remember. Parts of the past comes up in flashbacks.
Terry Lemoyne's nightmare began in 1977, more than a year after the Mount Cashel scandal was hushed up by the Justice Department and the Congregation of Christian Brothers.
My confidence, my self-esteem, my childhood basically was taken from me.
Describe to me what your days are like now.
Most of the times I don't want to get up. At times I just wish that I wouldn't catch that oxygen, It's a battle, fighting. I'm fighting myself now. It's I don't know, it's I can't even explain it. I just know it's I get up in the morning if I'm alive. I'll do whatever I can to make it through the day before I turn out the lights and go to bed.
Psychiatrists were so concerned for Lemoyne's mental health during the trial, they cleared the courtroom during his testimony. Since then, Lemoyne has lived off and on the streets of Toronto and in shelters for the homeless. Right now, he survives on a medical disability.
To sleep on the streets was one thing. You know, it was cold. Putting a cardboard, box over you type thing to try to shield you from the wind or the rain or whatever. I mean, it's not a life that I want to live or that I wanted to live. It's just that I happened to be there, and I tried to make the best of what little I had. You know.
There were suicide attempts. Once he tried to shoot himself. On another occasion, he barely restrained himself from jumping in front of a streetcar.
I can't even remember it. I just know I was pretty upset. I was drunk. I wanted to end it, but part of me kept coming back to me and saying, no. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't.
Is it fair to say that Mount Cashel shattered you as a person?
Yes, that is very fair to say. Yeah. I've been diagnosed as a multiple personality disorder. It's almost like a big identity crisis. You know, you got all of these parts within you, and one wants this, and one wants that, and the other one wants this, and it's like you're almost fighting with these parts every day to try to give them something to keep them quiet so you can go about doing what you need to do. You know, but everyone has a hand in certain parts.
Shadowboxing is one way Lemoyne deals with the stress.
I mean, I get lightheaded a lot, you know, because they want to come forward, and when my head gets light, it's like, oh, no, not now, not now.
Who was the boy who wanted to end it?
I don't know if it was Scott, that's a part of me, or if it was Zachary.
Tell me about those two.
Scott, he's quiet. He doesn't say much. He likes to draw. He's a lot to himself. He expresses his views in art. And Zach, he's just a small kid who's afraid of everything. I don't know, he sees more. He sees more than, I mean, he suffered so much that he feels that there's something more to this than what I have now. You know, these little things around the house. I got a teddy bear, it's not even mine. You know, I got a doll, it's not even mine. But it is, like, you know, it's parts of me that are expressing things, and it makes it hard. It's like Humpty Dumpty, you know. He fell off, and, you know, he broke up, and they couldn't put him back together, and me, I'm trying to work on putting myself together. I don't know how long it's going to take, you know, but it's hard to say.
Vancouver is one of the loveliest cities in North America. but it also has its seedy side. It's a side of Vancouver well known to Gerard Brinston. Brinston also ended up on the streets after he left Mount Cashel.
I hustled on the streets. I guess was a male prostitute when I was 15, 16, 17. And that was the only way that, like, you know, I knew, really, you know. I didn't know much more, you know. Even when I was growing up in the orphanage, like, you know, you were given, they had this room there called a tent room where they kept all the candy and pop and everything from the raffle on Water Street. And I remember when I was really young, 11, I guess, when I went in the orphanage, and when everything first started happening. Then after it was all over, they would take you and give you a pop or candy, things like that, and that's pretty well, like, you know, what I knew. Like, you know, I didn't have any education when I left the orphanage, and I just knew that, like, you know, if I gave somebody what they wanted, then I would get something in return, and that's all I knew, really.
Gerard Brinston knows exactly what's in his future, and it is not good.
Hello, Gerard. How are you?
Fine.
Good to see you.
There's something wrong with my eye.
Something wrong with your eye? What happened here?
I'm not sure.
Brinston is HIV positive. He has a virus linked to AIDS.
Look down here. It's quite red. Is it painful?
Doctors told him he has 2 to 5 years to live. They told him that 6 years ago.
I've been on antibiotics for, it must have been a couple of months now, just on and on. There's always something, an infection in the ear, eye, throat, like, you know, swelling glands, and but I guess it's all related to the condition.
Okay, I think what you have here is conjunctivitis in that left eye, and we'll give you some antibiotic eye drops to put in your eye.
Okay. So it'll take a few days?
Take a few days, yes, 3-4 days, but you keep on with the drops for 7 days.
Okay.
All right? I'll give you a prescription for it.
Thanks.
Good.
What kind of preparations do you have to make?
Well, as you know, I have to, like, you know, plan my own service, things that I want that I didn't want anybody else to have to worry about, and, like, you know, and that's pretty tough, like, you know, being 33 years old and knowing that you're going to die. And people think I'm silly because, like, I wanted to be cremated and just wanted my ashes net rubbed into my dogs, because, like, you know, they've been my soul friends, right? Like, they've been there when I was really hurting and when I was happy, like, you know, so they've been here through all of it. So,
Ironically, Brinston lives just blocks away from one of the brothers who abused him, Brother Edward French. French was paroled after 8 months in prison.
It breaks my heart that, like, you know, that I have to sit here and, like, you know, like, I don't know, it's like, you know, most of them that were sentenced and things like that are out, and I feel like I'm the one that's really doing time.
You regret coming forward?
Yeah. It caused more pain, and, like, you know, then it was confusing at times. I was confusing love with pity, and I didn't want pity. I needed somebody to reach out and tell me that they love me, right? And that's all I needed, like, you know, all my life, really. If I had to have that, then maybe, you know, my life would have been much different, right? But, like, you know, I look at my brothers at home, and just the thought, like, you know, if I could have been like them, I could be home and have children, a happy life. And now I sit and reflect, that I'll never have, none of that. And it hurts.
You think you would have had that without Mount Cashel?
And I'm not sure. I like to think I could have. My brothers and I were kept together. I think I've always wanted a child, and I kept thinking that I would never let anything happen to him that happened to me, and maybe I would have been a good father, maybe I would have been too protective, but just knowing now that this will never happen. Oh well.
Yes, say I love. Say I love you. Can you say that? Can you say it? Say I love you. You love me. We're a happy family. Really great big hug and a kiss from me to you. Won't you say you love me too? Yes.
Shane Earl, the boy who went into Mount Cashel at the age of 6, is now a family man. His daughter, Courtney, is the best of many changes in his life.
It was just like everything else before that didn't matter. And that here we have a beautiful, brand new baby, fresh into this world, and that I'm in a position where I can care and love this child and give this child the things that I never had in my life. And so nothing else didn't matter anymore. Okay.
When Shane Earl was 8, a Christian brother beat him so badly he went to hospital. That led to the police investigation that was ultimately covered up. Shane Earl was the first to talk publicly about the abuse at the orphanage. He led the call for an inquiry, but he says his experience was humiliating.
I just felt defeated, and I felt that I was being trampled on, and I felt that I was being abused and misused and being taken advantage of. I felt like I was sinking, and I needed to swim ashore and get my head above water and leave.
He did get away. He moved here to Halifax. 2 years ago, he married his Newfoundland sweetheart, Debbie, a paraplegic, at this private ceremony in Jamaica.
How did you feel about marriage?
Terrified. It was a commitment. I wasn't sure if I loved myself enough to marry such a perfect person. And if I didn't feel good about myself, I had the fear of dragging down my wife with me, and I just overcome that. It's unbelievable how good my life is compared to what it used to be.
The other change in his life is college. In spite of 5 grueling years of testifying at inquiries and trials, Earl is thinking about becoming a lawyer.
I have my moments where, at times, my past history does overwhelm me, and I find myself still struggling with the same old feelings as before, but not as much, and I'm able to lay them aside. My life has changed a lot. Before I was never able to do that. I would dwell on my past, and at times I often saw myself playing the victim, and that became very demoralizing and probably very self-destructive. But I was able to get beyond that and knowing that this is not my avenue in life. I'm never going to get anywhere in life if I keep playing the same old tune. And that I really had to make changes.
She's had a miracle baby.
Yeah.
She loves her daddy.
I think God has given me, in so many ways, He has given me a second chance at my childhood by having Courtney. She's such a beautiful little girl, and I'll get to enjoy all those little things that she'll be able to experience. The reading of storybooks, watching cartoons with her, walking in the park. All those things I'll be able to enjoy with her, and I'll be able to enjoy him as a child in so many ways. But knowing that she's happy and that I'm happy and that life is comfortable.
Yeah.
What are you going to tell Courtney about your history at Mount Cashel?
My heart even stops a beat when I even think about someday having to tell her. Because I want her to know that her father has suffered while he was a child. Because, I mean, that's hard.
Leave me alone. We're just wondering if you have any comment at all, brother. Oh, sir.
Doug Kenny was the head of Mount Cashel in the mid-1970s, but he still maintains his innocence. He still describes the scandal as a conspiracy. But his refusal to admit guilt did not prevent him from getting day parole in March. He was sent to this halfway house in Ontario. He was granted full parole in September. Aurora, Ontario is a small, thriving town on the northern outskirts of Toronto. It's now home to Doug Kenny and his wife. She's a former Newfoundland nun who teaches in the area. Although his lawyers describe Kenny as destitute, Kenny lives in this plush Aurora neighborhood, in this $250,000 home. The Cadillac belongs to Kenny's brother.
That's him.
Kenny wouldn't open the door and talk to us. Last month, the Supreme Court added 2 years to Kenny's sentence, but he won't be going back to jail. His time on parole is considered to be time served. Doug Kenny still to this day maintains that this was a conspiracy against him. Do you agree with that assessment?
That's a tough question. No, I don't personally agree with it, but you know, I haven't read his statements on that, and you know, I don't know. I don't believe that. I believe that abuse occurred, and the courts have addressed that and have convicted.
Vancouver. Joe Burke was living here when the Mount Cashel scandal broke 5 years ago. He was vice principal of a school run by the Christian Brothers. Burke still lives in Vancouver, on this street. in this house. He never went to prison. His lawyers continue to appeal his conviction.
Yes.
I'm Deanne Fleet. I'm with CBC Newfoundland.
Yes.
I'm doing a documentary on Mount Cashel 5 years later. Can I have a few minutes of your time? Burke talked to us for 10 minutes after we turned off the camera, but he declined to do a television interview. Burke says that he is one of the victims of Mount Cashel. He says he gave 7 years of his life to Newfoundland, and it was all a waste. But ironically, he scoffs at the notion that Shane Earl is also a victim and says he's skeptical about the convictions against other brothers, such as English, Kenny, and Ralph. Joe Burke describes his life now as empty and says he wakes and sleeps with Mount Cashel on his mind day after day after day. He's still waiting to see whether the Supreme Court of Canada upholds his conviction and finally sends him to jail. Vancouver is also home to another convicted brother, Edward French. French now lives in this upscale West End neighborhood. He lives in this stylish high-rise overlooking beautiful English Bay. French is now retired. He shares an apartment with another Christian brother. Brother Alan Ralph was on day parole in Halifax when 2 new charges of sexual abuse were laid against him. In September, he was found guilty on one of those charges. In January, Ralph was released on day parole. He's forbidden from having contact with children. Brother Harold Thorne was also on day parole when he was brought back to court to face a new charge this fall. Another former resident had accused him of sexual abuse.
Leave me alone.
Thorne was found not guilty. Ironically, he admitted during the trial that there were other boys that he had abused, boys who have not come forward. Thorne was moved to the Archival Centre, a halfway house in Thornhill, Ontario. Kevin Short was living in Vancouver, working as a principal in a Christian Brothers school when he was arrested. He pleaded guilty and was paroled after 8 months. He now lives on the outskirts of Toronto in Scarborough. Short got married this summer and he and his wife live here. Our attempts to talk to Short were unsuccessful. David Burton was first convicted of sexual abuse at Mount Cashel in 1982. A Newfoundland appeal court reduced his sentence to 12 days. Last year, Burton was convicted on another charge of abuse. He confessed and gave police the names of 5 other boys he had abused. None of them, now in their 20s and 30s, would agree to come forward. They said it would be too hard on them and their families. This is the congregation's retreat center in Mona Mills, just outside Toronto. David Burton lives with 2 other brothers in a home nearby. Schools in Ontario's Catholic system now send children and teachers here for retreats. David Burton works in Mississauga at Place Tech. It's a factory run by a former resident of Mount Cashel Orphanage, Bill Hickey. Yes, I'd like to speak to David Burton, please.
Who are you?
My name's Deanne Fleet.
I don't think one stopped you.
Can he make that decision himself?
He's already told me that. I think that he told you that he didn't want you guys to do anything.
No, he didn't. He
Yes,
said
did.
he would consider
And
it.
I want you to take your camera crew and yourself off my property.
Certainly.
Before I call the cops.
No problem.
Okay.
Thank you. This is British Columbia's Okanagan Valley. It's a popular tourism spot, renowned for beauty and good weather. Lumbee is a small resource-based town nestled below the mountains, and it's home to Stephen Rooney. Stephen Rooney is the man who sexually abused Terry Lemoyne and another child. He was paroled in July of 1993. Until very recently, Rooney was selling advertising for this Lumbee newspaper. Rooney now works for a friend, Dan Robertson, known locally as Dealer Dan. He also lives with Robertson in this home.
He told me that he just wanted to leave it alone and give very low profile on it, so.
That's his choice,
Yeah,
but
you know.
one way or the other, we will be doing a documentary, as I told him,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
Mount Cashel, and I'd like to offer him the opportunity
Mhm.
to respond and comment
Mhm.
on how his life has been affected and what his life is like now.
Oh yeah. Well, like I say, that's up to him. I'm just a friend of his. You know, so if he wants to do it, I suppose it's up to him.
Sure. I'll stop back about 9.
Okay. Yep. All right.
We did return, but Stephen Rooney was not there. Brother Edward English is still in jail. English is the only brother to serve all of his sentence inside the walls of Dorchester Prison. At least 2 of the brothers were sent to these Westmoreland minimum security townhouses. Some corrections officials refer to them as condos. English is now eligible to apply for day parole.
It's cost us in ways that are, for every brother, personal. There's a collective shame that we carry for the evil that has been done by members. It's cost us in terms of the way in which we are perceived. I can speak personally on that, in that you know that when you introduce yourself and people, or are introduced and people say you're a Christian brother, there is that hesitation about the public perception of Christian brother.
I reached the point where there really wasn't much point going on.
Did you tell anybody about this?
Did he and you ever discuss Mount Cashel?
Did you, in any way, directly or indirectly, give any instructions that this investigation should be discontinued?
No.
They became almost as well known as the victims and bureaucrats they questioned. David Day was a former federal drug prosecutor in Newfoundland. Clay Powell was a Toronto lawyer who had defended a member of the Rolling Stones and prosecuted the owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Harold Ballard. Powell and Day were the lawyers for the Hughes inquiry. Nothing they had ever done before prepared them for it. Clay Powell now lives on this farm on the outskirts of London, Ontario.
That's the girls. Good girls.
Powell now prosecutes only on a part-time basis. He breeds French poodles and writes novels dealing with child abuse, foster homes, and the Catholic Church. He is haunted by Mount Cashel.
Whether that inquiry was simply too much for me on a work side, which I can't accept, or whether my background had never trained me to handle those types of horrific stories of things that could happen to kids in an institution run by the church that's set up there to protect them. And the only thing I say is it blew my mind. And when I say blew my mind, apparently that's what happened.
Come on here. Yeah, that girl.
By the time we'd finished there, and
Good girls. Good girls.
the report was done, and then it was delayed for a while, I really didn't know what was wrong with me. I really didn't want to go downtown Toronto or do anything. Over the next few months, I wouldn't answer the telephone. I didn't want to see anybody. I felt that I had reached the point where there really wasn't much point in going on. And it's the only way I can put this and tell you. I contemplated the best thing to do was to put my car at a high rate of speed into a bridge, and because that way, well, maybe it was an accident or something, and I didn't want the kids to think.
In that frame of mind, a close friend drove Powell here to the London Psychiatric Hospital. Powell stayed in the hospital for 4 months. He was diagnosed as clinically depressed. He is still an outpatient here, still takes antidepressants, and still visits a psychiatrist weekly.
And you live in a black hole. You don't really know why you're there or how you fell into it, but there's just nothing you want to do. There's nothing that's any good. There's nothing out there. It's all bad. Do you know something? Last thing. 2 weeks ago, a friend of my wife's mother died in Toronto. She was 93. So we went to the funeral. It was in a Catholic church. I've not been in a Catholic church in many, 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 many years. There was a young priest who was Oriental, I don't know from where. There were, I think, 9 people attending this funeral mass. And there were 2 little altar boys. From the time I walked in until that service was over, I just kept looking at that priest and those altar boys and wondering. That's sad.
Someone else plays on Clay Powell's mind, Greg Pershon. Pershon was one of the first to testify at the Hughes inquiry. Powell pressured him into it.
I heard very quickly after he'd given evidence that he was in very bad shape over it, and that he regretted doing it. and that it had caused him problems, and he'd wished he'd never heard of it and things. Plus, he was such a fragile little guy, and that was the first really you were getting into this, you know, this house of horrors of what was going on in there. And bear in mind, I'd been the one that had been directly responsible for it all being televised.
What would you say to Greg Prashant?
Now, I think that it would have to be between he and I, you know, if he would talk to me.
I remember doing an interview with you in 1989 in which you told me, at the end of the day, Newfoundlanders will know exactly what happened inside Mount Cashel and who was responsible for what. Do you think that you achieved that?
I remember the interview. I remember saying it. I remembered believing it at the time. Bottom line, no, I don't.
Powell wasn't the only one forced to look at the details of sexual abuse at Mount Cashel. David Day was his co-counsel. Day declined to do a television interview, but Day told us he was so devastated that he went through a period where he found it almost impossible to work. Day says he's still recovering from the trauma.
We're not doing what I think we needed to do.
Michael Petit spends half of his time traveling. Petit works for the Child Welfare League. It's an American agency that essentially sets the standards for child welfare in much of the Western world. Petit has seen it all. 2 years ago, he was invited to look at Newfoundland's system. He was not impressed.
I would rank Newfoundland on the lower end of the scale in terms of its overall responsiveness to this issue. I don't think they're responding very effectively.
There are still a large number of people out there who say this problem is blown out of proportion.
Well, you know, I guess it really depends on your point of view. If you think that 1,400 or 1,500 children alleged to be involved with sexual relationships with adults is something that's blown out of proportion, I'd say in proportion to what?
Petit's report on Newfoundland's child welfare system says social workers are so overworked they can't protect children from child abuse. The most desperate cases get attended, but they miss a lot. Among his recommendations a call for 100 more social workers. Petit's findings were endorsed in a follow-up report by the Director of Child Welfare, Terry Stapleton. One of the ways government responded was to transfer Stapleton out of his job.
It's all very well for somebody who has no responsibility for tax to recommend we spend millions. Now, I could solve the problems of the United States and the whole country with no difficulty whatsoever. I just tell them how much money to spend and then go and spend it, and all these problems would be solved. But if I had the burden for taxation to raise those dollars, that's a different story. And that's the position the gentleman who wrote that utopian report is in.
If the province's position is that it's not going to seriously address the problems of child sexual abuse, perhaps it shouldn't have it on the law books as being an offense. And so rather than pretending that it's doing something about it, perhaps it ought to be more honest about it and just say that we become the first place in the Western industrialized world where anything goes between adults and children. Otherwise, it's a pretend situation.
Government has hired 25 new social workers since Petit's report. Only half of them work in the area of child welfare. Government has also cut funding or refused to fund some services. Among them, the Working Group on Child Sexual Abuse, closed. The Anglican and United Family Counselling Service, closed. Emmanuel House, reduced funding. Rape Crisis Center, reduced funding. Mental Health Association, reduced funding. Doctors, counselors, and social workers say things are getting progressively worse. They're here as a group today to speak out against it.
We've had some desperate calls from school counsellors looking for guidance, looking for support, information, looking for places to tell people to go for help. And very often there's nothing available.
And what happens is the hospitals then are getting the referrals that the community should be getting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of these people don't need to be in hospital. The majority don't need to be in hospital. But because there's no services out there, eventually that's where they end up.
It takes a lot of courage for a survivor to come forward and to say, I want to talk about this. I feel that I need some help. And you're sitting on the other end and saying, I'm sorry. You know, we have a 6-month waiting list or longer. And you're just sitting there, and it's so sad.
And we've had women in the group who've waited 2 years to get into a survivors group. So it's very difficult for them to sit around for 2 years and put everything on hold. But that's the reality.
Could Mount Cashel happen again? If not in an institution, then in a foster home?
I would like to think no, but unfortunately, yes, it could happen again.
And in my mind, Mount Cashel is not over, because it's happening in people's homes. Professionals are still affected by it. We're not doing what I think we needed to do.
Kay Young, Newfoundland's Minister of Social Services, sees things differently.
We have done the best that we can. Matter of fact, when I took over Minister of Social Services, I was certainly impressed with what has been done over the past 5 or 6 years. It's just been a big change in attitude toward the issues.
The province isn't as poor as it represents. It may be poor compared to the other Canadian provinces, but it's certainly not poor by world standards. And it's spending a hefty sum of money already on a wide variety of things, from athletics and universities to roads to hunting to many matters. So are the needs of its children less important than any of those things?
Forgiveness? No. Forgiveness? No. Sorry just doesn't cut it. Sorry can't give me back something that's been taken away.
And as each one goes to prison, they still deny everything. And, they ruin so many people's lives.
People who take on the responsibility of looking after children and then abuse them are evil.
It's like being a Vietnam vet. You've been through a war, and you've seen a lot of tragedy in that war, and it's something that you'll have to deal with.
Suicide is is on the top of the list of things that can take place.
I think our Jewish friends have a lot of sense when they say, never forget.
Forgiveness? Forgiveness, no.
I lie in bed at night, sometimes 3 and 4 in the morning, and just think of these men. I mean, I dare to call them men because to me they're not men, they're monsters.